are you?
I'm excited to be here and talking to you, seeing you. It's been way too long.
It's been really long. So I'm gonna just do a little intro of what we're doing this morning and then kick it off. So I want to just say good morning. It's October 10th of 2021, and I have the pleasure of sitting here with Marie Anderson, who I have known since, I believe it's 1987, back in the Chicago days. And Marie is a fashion model industry expert and the founder of Boss Babe Models. And Marie had the integral pleasure of meeting me as a very young, up-and-coming hair and makeup artist, and had some very formidable effects on me and who I aligned with and where I went forward from. And Marie has always had a very soft spot in my heart. I'm gonna get welly all of a sudden. I don't know. I didn't see that one coming. And from that perspective, I wanted to say that you have just really been somebody who has been just such an important part of how I got started and how I saw things. And I want to say that I can't thank you enough for that. So Marie, when I met you in 1987, how long had you already been in the industry with Elite Modeling Agency?
Okay, so we have to take it a step back, just a scooch. I started working for Jane Stewart, who owned Stewart Talent. I think that was like 1983, 84. And it was shortly after starting with Jane Stewart that I had discovered Cindy Crawford. And then it was a year later that John Casablancas and Jane Stewart merged and created Elite Chicago. So technically, in my mind, I was with Jane the whole time, but if you separate it, it was Stewart Talent for 1 year, and then eventually Elite for 6 years. So by the time you and I finally got together, I was quite a seasoned agent.
Yeah, you were, and you were carrying that. You're carrying that throne very, very much so. I mean, because I did not know. I knew about Cindy, but I did not know about Jane, and then the marriage of those two agencies. And was Jane? I can't remember, because was she around? Was she in the office? Was she all part of that, or did she get absorbed? Because there was just, when I think of the office, I think of just all this flurry of activity.
Mhm.
And you'd be in and you'd be out. So you were never like sitting there like you guys are sitting there watching us all come in and out. So tell me about that.
Well, she was definitely there. And quite honestly, Jane preferred to be in the background, so to speak, and allowed me to be the spokesperson, the front of the agency, so to speak.
So that's how that worked. I get it. So when you joined Jane and then John Casablancas, in those two married themselves, how long had John had Elite? Do you know at that point?
He had opened up Elite in Paris in the late 70s.
Okay.
And then had a relationship with Eileen Ford. And then he opened up Elite in New York. I don't remember what year it was. It was like maybe 79, 80, something like that. And then the model wars started, and then all sorts of chaos broke out in the business. But he had been, by the time we became Elite Chicago, I think he had been there in New York, maybe 4 or 5 years.
It's such an interesting time because the likelihood of you and I meeting, I can take back to 1980 when I was, which really was and wasn't happening. I mean, because one thing, having been a kid that was raised in the fashion business, it would have seemed natural that had my family still had a business, I would have expanded into let's use models, because my family used models in New York, you know, for runway shows and all those things. And there was just that, you know, hiccup in my own family lineage. But coming forward then to be a young student in college, to have somebody randomly show up to the indoor tennis club that I was running, i.e. Stan Malinowski, riding a motorcycle out for a weekend to Rockford, Illinois with another couple friends of theirs, and hanging out in the gift shop and striking up a conversation with this young 18-year-old girl going, you know, you should come to my studio sometime. And I'd be like, and why would I do that? Why would I do that? Like, who are you? Oh, well, I'm this, you know, this famous photographer who's got these spreads in Vogue, which in fact he did at the very same time of our conversation. Beautiful, gorgeous images. And I will say, as a person who comes from a fine arts background, I had a very, I knew what I liked and I knew what I didn't like visually. So I knew I liked his images, but I also knew there would be no way in hell that why would I ever meet this man? Cut to 6 years later, you of all people are sending me to Stan's studio. And I was just like, how did this happen? Like, I did not see, I was doing vision boards that weren't called vision boards at 9 years old, Marie. I manifested all the things that little 9-year-old girl. There were blue ribbons and awards. There was the SNL original cast, because it was that year, you know, it was 76, 75, 76. I had all like the cone heads, and I had all these things that my art, all those things became. So coming back to you and Stan and the history of yourself, I just think it's so fascinating how you and I have had this thread that even though we haven't worked together, and even when we worked together, it wasn't really working together because I was like in this outer circle of what you were doing, but I always felt this connection to you. And I think it's just by nature, this connection, like this respect, this honor. We've seen each other grow. We've seen each other go through these ebbs and flows, and yet not really seeing it, but feel it. Like, yeah. You know what I mean? Like, there's just some of us who are just soulfully connected. And I always felt that about you. So going back to you and your career, and at that time, first off, like the whole Cindy Crawford thing, that's one of the things that I remember very early on, because Cindy being from DeKalb, me being from Rockford, being, you know, the Chicago base, smart, beautiful, all those things. I remember that being a big deal, but I never knew the backstory, how that happened. How did that happen?
How did I discover her?
How did you discover Cindy?
So as you know, I was running Stan Malinowski's studio, and I was doing that.
No.
Shut the front door.
No.
Shut the front door right now. You just shut it right now.
I swear to God. I swear to God. Think about this. Tell me more.
So I became Stan Malinowski's studio manager approximately 1980.
Shut the front door. That was all happening that same year? Oh my God, Marie. Okay, continue.
So for about 3 years, you know, I was Stan's studio manager. And he would take me to Rome twice a year, and we would shoot the Italian collections. And then depending on what year it was, we'd go to New York and shoot a cover of Vogue. And then we would come back to Chicago and shoot a week of Sears. So needless to say, I got a phenomenal education in the true global haute couture fashion industry, as well as what used to be called catalog,
yeah,
which is pretty much now called e-commerce. But back when I was running Stan Studio and going to Rome and doing those collections and shooting the covers of Vogue, Stan had this incredible eye for beauty, and it tended to be a little darker, a little more exotic. And yes, he did shoot Christie Brinkley for Vogue, but it was more like when he shot Gia for Vogue.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it was like Gia was really kind of more his kind of girl. So when I would be in Valentino's atelier with Stan, with literally Valentino on set, he would have like Dalma, Apollonia, Beverly Johnson, Iman, again, these dark beauties. So my eye was trained is the easiest way I can explain it as the precursor for Cindy.
Yeah, for
So
certain.
after being Stan's studio manager, he mentioned to me one day, Marie, why don't you become an agent? Because you're spending way too much time on these castings, rearranging models' books and giving them advice. So why don't you become an agent? Never even occurred to me. So I called Jane Stewart, who owned Stewart Talent, and we were booking mainly her models. Okay. Why? Because they were darker. Let me see, we had Carrie Harper, Sandy Freeman, Cindy Waite. These were all top girls that, again, they were not traditional blonde, blue-eyed, all-American girls. Mm-hmm. So I migrated towards Jane Stewart as an agent because our eyes were very simpatico. Mm-hmm. So I called her and I asked her, you know, I would like to become an agent. How can I work for you? And essentially she said, when do you want to start? Because I had already been working with her, booking her models. The relationship was already there. She knew my eye. She knew my professionalism. So as soon as I found my replacement, Linda Thompson, I started to work at Stewart Talent. I think it took about 2 weeks. And then it was within the first couple of months of my working for Stewart Talent that, and my position in Stewart Talent was booking women, hair, makeup, and wardrobe stylists. Imagine that.
Imagine.
And then, so I was interviewing this makeup artist by the name of George Statner. And in his book was this beautiful, exotic teenager. And I said, oh my gosh, who is she? He said, oh, her name is Cynthia Crawford. She's already been turned down by the agency. She's not interested in modeling. And I said, oh, no. Please, will you help me get in touch with her? And Scott Tytler was the photographer. Oh, wait, not Tytler. Sorry, he's in Florida. Scott Weimer from Indiana had shot those photos with George Statner and Cynthia. And as a result, it was really Scott that helped me with George track down Cindy. And that's the quick version.
I love that. And where was she in DeKalb going to NIU at the time?
Yeah, she was in high school. And, you know, initially just not interested and quite dismissing the modeling business as a result of her experiences in it. And I just had to sell myself and my services and my background and encourage her to come to Chicago and have a meeting with me and her mom after school. How cute.
I love that.
And so she did. And then it was because her parents were divorced. After the meeting with her and mom, then I had to have a meeting with her mom and dad. Mm-hmm. And dad gave her a loan. I think it was like $500 or something. And she did her first paid test. And they were absolutely beautiful photos. And that was really how the career got started. But if we can take it a step further, I admire her so much because even though she had been so dismayed with the business initially, in the very beginning, she wasn't an instant success because of her exotic beauty, because she did not look like your traditional blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, at that time, the Chicago market wasn't very educated on what was considered a more editorial type of model. Right. But she hung in there. And eventually Scribnesky would take her under his wing And as soon as Victor Skripneski started shooting her, then all of a sudden, oh, well, the other photographers now want to shoot her. Oh, now she's pretty because Victor said so.
Yeah.
So that was the humble beginning.
Well, the humble beginning is perfection. I think it's those kind of stories that actually need to be heard more, versus the, oh, just push the button and we're famous. The lights go on, the curtains pull back, the music goes, and you're on. And we all know that that's not the case, and we all know that it's a series of events of just being in the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
Having the right eyes, having the right network, having the right everything, and the decisions that you make along the way, the yeses or the nos.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just a series of those very foundational things that determines people's outcomes. Isn't that crazy to you when you think about it in that really basic way?
It's kind of mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing.
The magic of life.
It's like a philosophy and a religion and a concept all got together and made love and went, ooh, let's do this. Boom. And there you are.
Yeah.
This is how we're going to create every human being's story. And here's her story. I mean, people don't.
She ended up being class valedictorian. So, and DeKalb downtown Chicago was not an easy trip, and there was a lot of construction on the highway during the time. So, she really sacrificed a lot as a teen, as a young woman aspiring to be a model, sacrificing that time being on the road and going on castings and not being booked, and people making stupid remarks about the beauty mark on her face. I saw that, and in my conversation with Cindy, she had brought it up, and she said, do you want me to remove it? And I said, no, someday people are going to know you for that. I didn't know what I believed it, but I didn't know, I wasn't a fortune teller, obviously, but it just seemed like common sense. Like that would be her designator.
Right.
And back to the whole Gia situation, as you know, unfortunately, she would pass away.
Yeah.
Not too later after that, after Cindy started. And by the time she got to New York, people were calling her the baby Gia because they did look so similar in their dark, exotic beauty.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting you mentioned that, Marie, because of the trajectory of today and, Black Lives Matter and just that secular conversation and just throughout history, whether it was, darker coming abroad on the boats and, getting to Ellis Island and, what neighborhood they ended up in, versus, all the movements that we've seen. And ironically, before I met you, and I had just gotten out of school, and I was now post my fine arts pre-med films theater studies, was now in beauty school of all goddamn things, and people were like, what the fuck? How did this happen? What? And I just kept saying, oh, it's a part of the process. I mean, honestly, I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. It was just to get them off my back, because at that point I just didn't want to be a starving artist.
Yeah.
I needed to pay back a shitload of school loans, and I needed to functionally get into the world that I wanted to be in and I had no connection to. And ironically, so for me, while going to beauty school, was working for the Clinique Corporation. And working for the Clinique Corporation allowed me to meet a lot of people, like just in a civilian sort of way, create conversations, teach, show, tell, sell, and get my mind like confident to get myself to the next steps. And it was ironic because it was during that time that the only ethnic line on the makeup counters was Fashion Fair.
Yes, I remember that so well.
Right?
Yeah.
The pink packaging, and I would always be Right, right. And I'd always, because you covered the whole floor or floors, because I traveled for Clinique. And it was one of those crazy ass things that I kept thinking, I need to create my own line. I need to create my own line. I see color. I do color. I've been doing color all my life. And this isn't doing it. And I remember being approached to do my own line after you and I had met. This was during, like, I think I was interacting also a lot with David and Lee at the time. And I forget the owners' names of David and Lee. It was probably David and Lee.
David and Lee Whitfield. You're so cute.
And Lee was like, you need to do your own line. And I was like, I'd love to do my own line. I just don't want it to be private label. I don't want to just slap and label on something that everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
And until I can have my own chemist. And this is like, this was ballsy of me to say this and put my foot. I was at pre-Bobby Brown when I was being approached by this. I was probably stupid, Marie, like really like stupid on my part. But I never use that word, funny enough, because, you know, I think there would have been the reasons why it didn't happen. But at the time, and I think when my point to all this is cut to all these years later, one of those things that I found to be so deliciously something I was able to specialize in or do as with ease, as well as because I was heading up Black shows, Black movies, Black talent, I should say, with, in these projects, to now be like, well, you can't do that because, what could you know about that? And I don't mean me personally. I just mean in the world that we're living in right now. And I also understand the why. I understand that we need to make room. We need to address, but it's also very interesting being the girl who was the only white on the Black hair Olympic team. Or, I need to create a line. And this is 1980. This is 1985.
Wow.
Inclusivity, diversity, that was my childhood. Like, I didn't know any different. So whether it's Cindy Crawford or Iman or, the woman in my family, it was like, they were all considered exotic and beautiful, but yet they just were human beings and beautiful women to me, raising up around beautiful women was like, that was just what you did. Right. And I don't know if you know this about me. Did I ever tell you that my family was Playboy Key Club members?
That does not sound familiar.
No, well, of course it doesn't. So when tied in with the whole fashion thing and being around parents who bought art, and there was lots of nudity in our house, not gauche, very tasteful. Uh-huh. Them being Playboy Key Club members, it was a natural, trajectory, I thought, for me to like unconsciously go into the world that I've gone into. Like if I told you, even as recent as this last week, as I was removing body makeup on a woman who'd been on set all day in a major television series, and, and I'm like, here in the tushy area and stuff, and I'm thinking to myself, seriously, how many souls of mine have been doing this? How many souls, not so much taking off the body makeup off of somebody's tushy, but working with nudity, working with the human body, working in this beauty world, working in the world of illusion. Mm-hmm. And speaking of illusion, going back to your world and your career, did you ever sit back and go, like you'd see a young girl or a young boy come into your office and go, yeah, no, I know that they have the capability. And then you'd see images and go, holy smokes, and how they blew up? Or did you go, I never saw that. I saw that, but I never saw that. Like I knew that they had potential, but, because I, as a hair and makeup artist, have come home sometimes, and I used to do this ironically with Playboy, of all crazy things. Playboy, these women would walk in, many of them implanted, many of them extremely petite, they'd have little boy bodies if they didn't have implants, frankly. Lots of, big hair. I'll tell you, extensions weren't really like the thing I was fully cognizant of until I got to LA.
Yeah.
But I was already working with wigs, but not, ironically, shaitels with Orthodox Jewish women, not up in Rogers Park, but not extensions. Like your hair was your hair. Like your hair was your, what do you mean? Is this my hair? This is my hair. That's a question in LA, not in Chicago, that I experienced. Very funny thing. So, but the illusion, getting back to we being a part of forwarding this illusion, it really came to me when I was initially strangely doing Playboy, which sounds like, but we're after days of working with these young women of all these very sexual positions and giving the essence of, you want to make love to this, or however people want to say, fuck it, whatever, excuse me, rawness. Did you ever sit back and go, wow, I'm part of like creating this, like, I don't want to say animal, because part of it's beauty and part of it's like, as we both know, there's the light side and the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever have those feelings early on in your career, or did you ever, and if go ahead, let me have you speak.
What I heard were two different questions, not that I'm complaining. So I want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're asking. I think the first one was you were asking about what I interpret as vision. Like, did I have the vision to anticipate somebody's extraordinary execution of images? Was that one?
Yeah, and then taking their career to a whole nother level because of the illusions manifested.
So if we take the first one, as an agent, I could, within seconds, I could pretty much speculate, putting my career on the line every time I signed a contract, right? I could speculate, is this person a global editorial model? And is this person going to do covers? Or is this person going to be a catalog model in America? Mm-hmm. Like, you pretty much get a sense within a few seconds. And with that being said, that they can be successful based upon the interview and, asking more questions about their hopes and wishes and dreams and how much they're prepared to work. And the thing that would amaze me is I had the vision to be able to see, which is God's gift, not mine. It definitely is a higher power thing. But what would amaze me is that models, their own gift to share with us while on set. I have watched, which would be seemingly a very kind of pretty girl become extraordinary on set with the way they moved and the way they communicated their body.
Yeah.
So there were times, yes, that I would be editing film with my Schneider loop on the 35 millimeter slides.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd be going, damn, where did that come from? Like, holy schmoly. So I could not, as I said, I'm not a fortune teller, so I could not like see everything moving forward, but I would know which direction to kind of guide their career. Once in a while, there were exceptions. Like, do you remember Elizabeth Mastari, a real beautiful blonde? Anyway, I've learned so much from my models. It's the gifts just never stop coming. But I like two of these girls, or love them very much. So Elizabeth Mastari, I was telling her, no, I was not going to represent her. She had on too much makeup. She had big blonde hair from the suburbs. And I don't know if they were lead press on nails, but she was a mess. Yeah. And she was short. And if you remember back then, like 5'8", like, oh no, that's way too short.
Right.
not for elite.
Right.
Um,
Right.
But Elizabeth sat there in front of me and said, look, I have got the best lingerie body in this agency, and I know how to move myself. And if you give me a chance, I promise you, I'm going to make you a lot of money. I was like, well, you got to cut off those nails. You got to brush your hair. You got to wash off that makeup off of your, like, I was like, you know me. I just told her, great. And she did do everything I asked her to do. And she did start making us money like this.
And lingerie models, as we both know, they were triple rate at the time.
Yes.
I don't know now, but that was a very different salary.
Yep.
Swimsuit and lingerie.
It's the character of the individual that makes the difference. It's not only, as you know, it's not just the aesthetic. It's not just their height and their statistic measurements. It's what is the gunness of this individual, and how committed are they to that process of pursuing their goals?
Yeah, and they definitely have to have a jus de vivre, and they definitely have to have a light about them, and they definitely do have to, I think, also be aligned with the right people that recognize that light and package it together and raise it up. I think, again, it comes back to that, like, ooh, how are all those elements getting together and going, we're gonna make a baby, boom, and there she comes. And I think that really does, like, how is it that thousands and thousands and thousands from all over the world go through that rotary, door of, it's gonna be me, and how many of those me's actually turn into anybody who's making a career or a salary or, changing lives, multiple people's lives, because they've now become their own empire.
Absolutely.
And you were in the world of when the empires were happening. I mean, it's interesting. So for me personally, I got out of school in '84 when MTV was coming to be. And it was kind of like going from this pot smoking, artsy fartsy, like intellectual, like all this politician, like kind of mindset, and no makeup and all natural. But you could hear me walking across campus with my like chimey earrings and my, God knows what spicy scent I wore on my body, to this all of a sudden, what's this MTV shit? Like, and they're like lied the whole world of over time watching this world of fashion and music and entertainment all come together into the whole movie making world of, and just setting out a trajectory, and how that changed. We're girls and kids of the day of Twiggy, right?
Yeah.
And Twiggy was like the name.
Uh-huh.
And Twiggy was the name, I know for myself. I can only, I don't know, like, because you were in Florida at the time, right? You were born and raised in Florida, right? And so I don't know how that affected you as a little girl, Twiggy, in your mind. Me, for Twiggy, was like everything related to my fashion business, family, lineage, everything like I paid attention to it, being in the salons with like my first hairdresser who cut my hair was a British gay guy, that gave me like this sweet ass little, Jesus, why am I going blank? Pixie haircut, because my mom did not want to deal with my hair. But again, there were all these reasons why I entered this world. For you, how was it that you think, could you have seen the little Marie in Florida coming into this? Did you see, what was going on in your little girl's brain is that led you to where what became your career?
Well, I really didn't have the blessings that you had. And I love hearing those stories when parents empower their children with all that kind of exposure, so to speak, to expand your brains. If I can be perfectly honest, my mother was a violent schizophrenic, and that was not a pleasant environment. And my father was really not available. He was a rocket scientist at NASA during the Apollo Moon program. So, he had absolutely no interest in me, which, as an adult, I could understand. I'm very right-brained. He was extremely left-brained. So, but ironically, with my mother's insanity, which, as we all know, intelligence and crazy are very close together, and creativity was kind of like her thing. And she had been a model before she even met my dad, but it wasn't like she was with an agency, and like she was never like a Wilhelmina or anything like that. It was just kind of local stuff. So the point being, when I was essentially just past being a toddler, there in Florida, my mother was doing all these community fundraisers, and she was producing these fashion shows, and I was one of her models in her fashion shows. And so she exposed me to the modeling world there, and she also taught me how to sew. And so I was making my baby dolls clothes when I was 5 or 6. And then eventually I would become very sophisticated with my craftsmanship, then I would expand to Barbie. And then I'd be producing my own fashion shows in my bedroom with Barbie and Skipper and Tressie. And and I only had one Ken. So, and I had no interest in a menswear. So menswear line. So he would be the only guy in the audience. And so anyway, that was really it was really quite fascinating as I'm kind of reflecting with you now. Here's my mother, who is fully functional, but completely out of her bloody mind.
Mm-hmm.
She's teaching me about modeling, teaching me about sewing, teaching me about this creativity that was accessible to me. And yet at the same time, teaching me the life experience of oppression. And
why oppression? Why oppression?
Like, being beaten and like making sure that I never thought anything of myself.
Because she was being abusive to you?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And
so any bit of light that would shine, she would technically beat out of you, so to make you feel less confident and to not make you feel like you were capable of doing all those things, because you didn't feel you were in an environment that supported that, technically speaking. Absolutely. So it's interesting that you say that, and it's interesting what you said preemptively about being, when you hear stories like my story, for instance. So yeah, I do think that I was lucky in certain foundational things, but at 14, it was all, it all disappeared when my parents divorced and we lost our businesses and my father died of a heart attack. And it's not that it disappeared, but like you, there were moments in life that you too had the foundation. You had a very smart father and a very beautiful mother who was also very smart, and unfortunately had the challenges of the mental DNA, obviously, stuff, right? And then you throw in abuse, and you throw in, like, I'm going to give you this little sprinkle over here, but then I'm going to give it over here, and then it's going to conflict, and I'm going to be like, who am I? Like, right? And how do I get out of this? And how do I make myself something, right? Or all of those little moments in time. And yet here you are, had, finding yourself, the light finding you, the magnets drawing you in, the finding, and raising yourself up and out, and doing that for a lot of other people. And basically what I hear and what I see is somebody who took those skills, your sewing skills, your fashion skills, your modeling skills, your intellect, your beauty, your sense of survival, your sense of going through abuse and recognizing abuse and knowing that that's not okay, but how can I make that work for me? And that's how you materialize your career which I very much, I mean, honestly, Maria, as much as I love and relate to you, even in this conversation, I'm like, holy shit, of course, we aligned with each other. Of course.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the beautiful thing. And again, this is part of the reason why, as you probably know about me and of yourself, creating conversations with people, that just kind of comes with it doesn't mean that, ooh, every time I'm going to walk in a door, you walk in a door, I'm going to create a conversation. No, but at the same time, we're curious by nature. We love the way people tick. We love the way people work. We love helping people. We love raising people up. We love bringing our love into the room and nurturing by nature. And for me, and I think for you, though I'm not speaking for you, I know one of the things I've always had this, like, I love raising people up, but at the same time, I want to be able to no longer I don't want to dim my light anymore either. Mm-hmm. And from raising a lot of people up for yourself, I would imagine that there's been moments like, I'm tired of dimming my light for the sake of everybody else. There's got to be somewhere in that moment of your journey that you were like, I am fucking done dimming my light for you. I have got to be me. I've got to be what I'm here to be. And I'm not saying that means dumping everything that you've already created, but is there ever been that moment when you've said, I need to shine? I'm not shining bright enough.
Those two moments, well, two significant moments were two marriages. It wasn't professional. It was personally, where I chose two men that were very drawn to me because of everything that I am, and then became very controlling and oppressive. And then I found myself like in that, proverbial dysfunctional, toxic relationship where, okay, I'm going to dim my light because your career isn't doing well. So let me try to help you, give you a better career. So then you'll allow me to shine more. And even when you get a better career than you had, you're still not allowing me to be me and to say what I need to be, what I need to express. And as you know, I love to talk. And when I have two husbands that are telling me to shut up, or I'm stupid, or nobody wants to hear what I have to say, so I had to divorce two husbands. It was never professionally, Felicia.
No, that's great.
My professional experience with every person I talk to is actually quite selfish, in that every time I help them, it helps my soul feel nurtured.
That's great.
And kind of hugged, because I had an opportunity to make a difference in their life. Now, they might not even know how much I did for them. Most of them don't understand the significance of what I've just given them, but it doesn't matter. My intention was not to be appreciated. My intention was to be selfish and to have that vicarious experience of helping them and giving them that light.
Well, that is a really, really cool approach of thinking, frankly. I give you a lot of kudos for that, because I think that it is interesting how these two separate yet, marriage and career go hand in hand, because you can't really separate them because one bleeds into the other, most likely. Now, I certainly know of one marriage that I was a part of. I can't remember. Did the other marriage happen before or after?
Oh, before. I was 16.
Yeah, there was this tingle of something that I was like, I know this, but I can't put my finger on it.
Well, we probably talked about like 30 years ago, like, duh, how could you remember every detail of everything?
So you were 16, still in Florida?
That's a bit complicated, but the answer is yes. the quick version is my father, along with thousands of other employees of NASA, were fired when the Apollo moon program was shut down. And so by then my father was in his 50s, and it was considered, he was not a desirable person because he only had kind of one skill set. And that was, where do you go after you've been putting men on the moon? Like, who's going to hire you, kind of thing. And remember, this is before the internet.
Yeah.
Before, computers were accessible to laymen, so to speak.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point is that I had just started dating my boyfriend at the time. We were in high school, and then my father got fired and he could not get a job in Florida. So he moved us to this very, very small town in the middle of the Blue Ridge Mountains called Wytheville.
And in Georgia or Tennessee, where were you?
No, in Virginia.
Virginia.
Wytheville, Virginia. And I think the population was 600 with one stoplight.
Wow, honey.
And it was really a horrible experience, because I was this little beach bunny walking around in sundresses and flip-flops, and they're walking around in like construction boots and overalls. And the first week of school, the principal brought me and my mom into his office and said, "You're creating too much disruption in the class. We need you to start wearing overalls." So it was quite an interesting lesson, and I had to adapt to their ways instead of them opening up their minds to, a different person and a different environment, a different aesthetic that I was bringing. I was threatening their values of, what is fashion?
Well, and body imagery and what is acceptable in different environments and how that shapes your image of yourself and what is right versus what is wrong based upon opinion, and it's subjective.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting conversation because I'm sure that definitely changed you in that short amount of time because of that awareness of not feeling accepted.
Felicia, it was, do you remember the movie Deliverance?
Of course, I did that movie. Didn't do that movie. I did when I was 14, going on the time my parents were divorcing, did that river because I did an expedition in Georgia in the Appalachians at 14 while my parents were getting divorced. So go on. So
that wasn't literally Wytheville, but that was the environment that I had just landed into. And I cannot make this stuff up. They killed my cat. They killed my dog. That it was such a bad, horrible place for me to live. And they would do things like, the kids at school were so vicious. Like, I would come in from PE into my locker and they had smeared food all over my clothes. I one day walking out of, I think it was science class, and I went to touch my hair and there were gobs of gum that had been, spit gum that had been thrown into the back of my head while we were in, it was just so horrible. And
how old were you?
By then I was going on 15.
Same age. This is crazy.
And so
talk about being violated.
Yes. And it would be like, one week they'd start being my friend, pretending like I was being finally indoctrinated, so to speak. And they were inviting me to a party. So various people were like, hey, my nickname, the first, I don't want to go down a bunny rabbit hole, but the day the night that my mother and I drove in for the first time into Wytheville, Virginia, there was this little convenience store called an IGA, which was a chain there. So we go into the IGA to buy some staples, and we're going through the checkout counter, and I noticed the young clerk behind the counter kept looking at me, and then he smiles with this shit-eating grin. He says, "Hey, you's Coco Ho, ain't you?" And I go, what? I go, Coco, hoe. And I look at my mom, I go, Mom, what's a hoe? She goes, get in the car. Just get in the car. And I was like, and she goes, just get in the car. That they gave me the name Coco Ho because I was from Cocoa Beach. And they had never even met me. And they gave me a nickname, right? Like, anyway, so fast forward. So we would be in school throughout the week. They'd be saying, hey, Coco, you going to the party? We're going to come pick you up. Roy and Cooter, we're going to come pick you up. So just be out and sit in your couch there in your front room, and we'll come by and we'll fetch you. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm so excited. And I go home and I tell my mom and my dad, I'm making friends at school finally. I would sit there on that Friday night, all dressed up, ready for them to come pick me up. And we had this big picture window. And it was like a duplex. It wasn't a, super fancy place by any stretch of the imagination, but it just happened to have this big picture window. And I was sitting there on that couch and I kept seeing cars driving by and nobody stopped to pick me up. And that was the joke. That was their party, watching me sitting there pathetically. And then Monday morning came around and they were like, hey, Coco, you enjoy that party? Hey, Coco, how you doing, Coco? Like, just such torment. It was so horrible. So eventually that following summer, my boyfriend would come visit from Cocoa Beach. Mm-hmm. And my parents allowed me to get married, to go back home to Cocoa Beach. And we were living with his parents in his bedroom while we were going to high school. And then I would realize I went from a violent mother to a violent husband. Mm-hmm. And then before I know it, I was, there was a loaded rifle against my head, and he had me down on the ground screaming if I ever left him, he would kill me. Mm-hmm. So, I just went from one like whack situation into another, but eventually I would leave him, go homeless, and eventually graduate from high school, move to Chicago, and eventually get in the modeling business and meet you.
Well, and how, listen, I mean, again, when I met you, I hadn't gone through abuse, eventually ended up in an abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. So for me to listen to that today versus what I may have heard in the 80s when I met you, if I had heard that story, I probably wouldn't have been able to have such empathy, not because I lack empathy, because of relatedness and perspective and understanding of the science of that mind and the writing on the wall, sadly, and the repeating history. Because the truth is you sharing with me your childhood stuff, unfortunately, my parents had a pretty violent relationship off and on. And so even though that got put to bed for a long time because of my father dying at age 14, going on 15. It wasn't until then I was in my early 30s that closet door got reopened to revisit, to be put to bed for good, like you put yours to bed for good. And that's the beautiful thing, that you and I can share and wrap each other's arms around each other and love on each other and go, yeah, that shit sucked. And that was painful. And here are two really powerful women who've been through some really shitty shit, but have been such inspirations to so many. And you and I just know each other as Marie and Felicia.
Right, right.
Like, what's the big deal? But to many, it's like, what are you talking about? What's the big deal? Like, look at you. Do you know who you are? No, I'm just Felicia. No, I'm just Marie.
Yeah.
And these are our roots.
Mm-hmm.
And our roots make us why we're such big-hearted. Like, get the fuck up and get the dust off and go kick that goddamn door open shit. Like, I will take, like I said, I said to my sister this last week, there was something she was talking about regarding an abusive boss. And There was this comment she made that really I don't remember exactly, but I said to her, I had just said to somebody, they don't want to meet me in the back alley because I'll take them out.
Mhm.
And I was like, I never used to talk like that until I survived domestic violence. And I said, because I'm like the lioness who just wants to eat, sleep, and make love. But if you mess with the people I live,
yeah,
shit's over.
Yeah.
And that's not a threat.
No.
And it's not like it's a fact. It is a fact. You have now fucked the wrong person. And there are times, and like yourself, like, first off, I can't even begin to tell you how sorry I am that you went through those experiences, because you didn't deserve that. And no, you can't write that shit.
Right. Mm-mm.
And you can't, like, to write that in a movie right now, those scenes would be so considered colorful, and somebody to receive an Academy Award for that shit. And because I could write that, like, I have chills, like, we're going to sit down and write that, but not for the sake of like, oh, we're going to, but because that shit is real.
Yeah.
You growing up, you going through that stuff, like, I mean, when you think about it, like the images that I got when you talked about your parents, your father being a part of NASA in the 60s, right?
Later 60s into the 70s. Perfect.
Exactly. So your colorful background of your beautiful schizophrenic mother model mother, your father, part of the NASA astronaut program. I mean, like that was the epitome of like a Camelot story. My parents were another version of a Camelot story. Two beautiful, educated people from two very different backgrounds. Russian Armenian Jew meets a Sicilian Catholic girl, and fashion industry versus real estate and politics, and and both just wanting to basically leave their environments and find each other, and boom, but then boom sets off more boom, 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 booms. Yeah. And I was basically raised in a household that in the 60s was not kosher. It was not only not kosher between the two in the 50s when they got married, 60s when I was born into, and then going into the 70s, and us all in our environments being raised around civil rights eventually, and Vietnam, and the astronaut program, and Kennedy being shot and killed, and then his brother being shot and killed, along with Martin Luther King being shot and killed, and women's rights, and the movement of abortion rights, and voting rights, and interracial rights. And like, that was what we were explosively born into those periods of.
Pretty intense when you mention it like that.
Well, that's how I lived it and saw it.
Yeah.
And that's like how I run in that period of time. Mm-hmm. And people are always like, wow, really? Nobody else talks like that. Like, who came up with, no, none of my friends talk like that either. But that was my vision, because I also saw, as much as my family worked very hard and did well, not wealthy, but did well. Mm-hmm. And then lost it, like certainly my father's, not my grandparents, but my father's, our unit, in the sense that, like the identity of who we were, really does reframe you in ways that you have no idea how it's going to come out. I'm so excited for you to join me for part 2, episode 5 of Camp Fifi Uncensored, with my interview with Marie Anderson, who she and I go back to the 80s in the fashion, beauty, entertainment industry, and how on part 2, we reveal just how much in today's day in conversation with regards to pulling back the curtains of the Me Too movement, and how those seeds that were planted back in the time that she and I first aligned and coming forward, just the integral parts of women supporting women and us having voices to support one another, and the courage that it's taken for so many people to be heard, and how it aligns with just life in general and being true to our spirit, and how we as all together are able to rise up and do some really powerful things in all the things that we're passionate about. Look forward to hearing from you and your feedback. In the meantime, grab those cannolis and s'mores and we'll take a listen around the campfire. Can't wait for you to join us. Bye for now. I am so excited and blown away for you to listen to part 2 of my podcast interview with Marie Anderson over fashion, beauty, and entertainment. Every week when I prepare these podcasts to drop, I have the opportunity to reflect by listening so I can hear what it was that we actually spoke on. And I cannot tell you how blown away I was. I literally, my hand went to my forehead when the interview was done. I couldn't believe how intuitively we were aligned with what was going on this more recent times, this week or so, over the entertainment industry. The timing was just beyond fascinating. But how we talk about everything from being warriors to getting really deep and raw about some personal experiences that we both have had and how it ties in to the businesses that we're involved with. I really look forward to you joining us around the campfire, and do yourself a favor, listen to the whole hour because it really gets juicy at the end. So, though I can never know what my guests are going to say, this is exactly why I'm doing this. And also prepare yourself because not only is it raw, but my words are pretty raw. So I look forward to you listening. I look forward to you joining me around the campfire. I look forward to you being a part of Camp BP Uncensored community. And thank you so much for once again joining me for another episode of what I'm excited to be building and sharing and having people understand that they too might hear themselves in these stories, that they too might have an opportunity to get a deeper insight to things. And that is, on top of being entertained, what my goal is. Thank you so much for joining. I look forward to you hearing, and I look forward to getting your feedback, and have a wonderful, wonderful week. Bye for now. And it's interesting because you walk around this super confident woman that people look up to. And I get that a lot. People just like, that woman just fucking roars.
Yeah.
And I'm like, like, but at the same time, the quaint me is like, you're fucking right, I roar. You noticed. Oh, good. I'm glad you know. But like, I don't know. Do you go through that, like that sheepish as well as that, like, get out of my fucking way, I got this?
Oh, hell yeah. Especially being a martial artist.
Well, of course, I'll never forget being on Laurel Canyon and meeting you outside the Gold's Gym on that grassy knoll.
Yes, that's so crazy. Yes, I was training with Harold Diamond, world-renowned martial artist, getting ready for my black belt test. So that must have been around, crap, 2003, 4, or something like that.
Yes, it was. You know why? Because I was. So I think it's so interesting because you're talking 2003, 2004, when we were meeting on that grassy knoll on Laurel Canyon, which is classic, because I remember going through that process being like, ooh, no, I don't like this. Too much touchy, too much. And I'm a very touchy-feely person, which is really funny for me that I was like, oh, no, too much touchy. But what I was doing at the very same time that you were doing that was I was training with a heavyweight champion boxer who I ended up dating. And
of course you did.
Of course I did. But ended up like training with all these pros who kept saying, oh, you need to go pro. And I'm like, no, I'm not going pro. And they're like, no, you have no idea when you get in the ring how mean your face looks. Wow. And I was like, seriously? And they're like, no, seriously, like it's such an intense focus that, and I was like, well, that's not happening. Like, I love the art of feeling confident. I love the form of exercise. I always knew it would align with me. But ironically, I don't like hitting. Like, I like hitting a bag or a glove, but I don't want to hit somebody. I don't want to be hit, which I think is ironic that we're in this like martial arts and boxing, but what we came from, which I think is probably, and I know on a certain psychological level and intuitive level, that it all freaking intertwines. Oh, I need to defend myself. I'm going to go learn how to defend myself. Oh, I just defended myself. Now I'm going to raise that bar. It's basically the story of like, you know, becoming your own warrior.
Well, it's interesting. You should bring that up. That whole kind of psychic, like psyche, I should say, psyche. I did not know this about myself until I was 17. And my husband at that time had taken, he was in the middle of beating me again, and he took this frying pan, you know, those big black skillets that used to sit on the stove. Yeah. And he took one of those and slammed it against my head. And it was the most amazing transformation where I got this literal superpower.
Yeah.
And I leapt at him and I got my hands around his throat. Now, this was a martial arts football player, like this unbelievable athlete. And I was now strangling him.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, he wasn't really fighting back.
Yeah.
And I was watching the life leave his face and he was turning blue. And all of a sudden, to me, it was God's intervention. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, I see like this ticker tape in my head, in my mind's eye. I see this ticker tape and it says, life has got to be better than this. Mm-hmm. And I let go of him. Mm-hmm. I know that when the time comes, there is a rage that can be rallied to the point where I was in, back to my training primarily is in Shidokan, which is a mixed martial art. And I was in Florence, Italy, and I think it was 2008, and I was rushing to a train. Yeah. And there were two, I'll call them gypsies because that's what they appear to be. Yeah. Two, a smaller male and a smaller female, tried to mug me.
Yeah.
And I knew that they were coming up behind me, thankfully, because my training, I was paying attention.
Yeah.
And I whipped around,
Yeah.
and this voice came out of me like something from The Exorcist.
Yeah.
And I screamed at them as loud as I could with my
Yeah.
warrior cry.
Yeah.
And I said, am I allowed to cuss bad? Can I
Oh,
say
yeah.
that?
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
So I yelled at them, and I won't do it now, but I yelled
No,
at them.
do it.
I'll break the speakers. I yelled at them, not me, motherfuckers. I mean, and it was long and loud, and these two people literally jumped back and they ran.
Yeah.
And one went down, they got to the intersection, one went right, the other went left. But I stood there like, who is that? Who, I mean, what?
Yeah.
So back to the thing about lioness and that ability to defend ourselves. It's like, I think most people, if they don't know that I train in martial arts, most people see me, from what I'm told, as this very sweet, super nice, almost too nice sometimes,
Yeah.
kind of person. And it's like, that's a mistake.
Mhm.
Don't misunderstand my indulgence of certain situations as a weakness. And I'm a pushover, because I'm not a pushover. I'm just paying attention and I'm taking notes until it's time where I really have to do something. So that whole martial arts training for me, and oddly enough, I started off as a boxer here in Chicago with Chris Cruz Christopher, who was a pro boxer. And she's the one that brought me into Chicago Fitness Center and got me into boxing. But I found out very early on, I did not like my face being hit.
Hello.
And I was not a good boxer. I'm a slow athlete. So my face was constantly bump, 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 bump. And the idea of blocking and bobbing and weaving, that just wasn't coming up for me very quickly. So that's why I ended up getting into the martial arts, because I needed more appendages, because I needed more tools.
You need an octopus versus just a focus light. And that's the funniest thing, because literally the very first time I stepped in the ring, which was literally just to learn my first few moves. One, I was a trained dancer. So Bobby
that was
maybe
natural.
moving,
Yeah.
oh, let's choreograph this. We got this. And the first thing I said to who then became my boyfriend down the line, because I was actually with my husband already as a boyfriend. I wasn't married to him. We then unfortunately broke up for a short time that I called out, and then ended up with the boxer. But the very first thing I said to him in that moment was, I'm here to box and learn how to spar and lose weight. Do not touch my face, because if you touch my face, I cannot tell you what the control, I will hit you fucking back. And I just knew it. And going back to that, who showed up, both in your situation with your marriage in that moment, and at the train station in Florence, things that it's funny, it's interesting, because I know I could have, like yourself, written screenplays, written books about surviving. I've often said I could go in front of Congress based upon the things that, in regards to being a believer or believing in the abuse and the abusing that's going on, the abuse that's going on behind closed doors that people do not seem to believe, and one of the things that, I've never really talked about this series of events publicly, of things that people would not believe, and when I left my marriage, which you are familiar with, being with Dan, who, because of you, did I meet Dan, you know, when I left that marriage and walked into what I didn't realize was going to be a domestic violent relationship off and on for 5 years, I have no idea where I got the skills to protect myself, because to the best of my knowledge, I had never been in a situation that I had to defend myself. I know that for a fact. And yet there were moments like yourself that I don't know who showed up, but I was grateful that I showed up however I showed up defending myself. But I also was told after the fact that there were moments that I really should have died in these moments of heightened abuse.
Yeah.
And that all of a sudden everything would dissipate. And I was even asked, do you remember those moments? And there were a couple of those very heightened moments throughout, off and on. And, you know, pregnant 3 times. I had never been pregnant before. I didn't get pregnant as a girl. Thankfully, I didn't get pregnant in my first marriage. Never protected, by the way, in 7 years, never pregnant. No sooner get out of this marriage in the process of divorce, like when papers are filed, immediately within 4 months, I'm pregnant. And the abuse starts up immediately. I mean, it is statistical. Like if you look at the paperwork of abusers.
Yeah.
And I tell this to people all the time, if you go into formal training or formal therapy in that version of therapy, you will learn, like I remember sitting in an office, and I don't mean to be jumping all around, but you know, this is how I talk, you know, that literally sitting in the office after getting out of that 5 years later, and there's 6 pages, Marie, of copy. And out of those 6 pages, 90% plus of my life was described being with this human being. And I think growing up in a world of narcissism and selfish behavior and manipulation and snakes in the grass, and we never know when these things or these people are coming in our way, right? And I think for people like ourselves who are kind, who are sweet, who are light, who are what darkness wants, because they don't have it, they don't know how to get it. This is the only way they get it, and then they dim it, going back to dimming light.
Yeah.
You know, from our original like opening this door conversation, do they then go, oh my God, there it is, I'm gonna get that? And they think of it as, like you said, don't take me for a fool. Like, yes, we both ended up innocently in these environments. And I say innocently with grace, because I think sometimes it can feel so embarrassing. So like, how the fuck of all fucking people did I end up in that fucking situation? Like, I have better things to do with my time. Don't you know I have got a world to conquer out here? How the fuck did I end up behind closed doors, being beaten in my head, being put in a dog bowl? Like, how did I end up in a closet thanks to some people who were in the foreign press, who were my next door neighbors, who saved me? So when he came looking for me down the hall, he couldn't find me, and they didn't reveal me. How is it that, you know, by the grace of God, in a moment of heightened, just because anytime Baca got into that man's system, all bets were off. And because it was a silent alcohol form of, you can't smell it, you don't see it, you don't know how it happened, and all of a sudden Jekyll and Hyde shows up, and in the flip of a switch, you are now in defense mode, and you could have just, you know, been in a whole nother mindset, and now you're in a defense mode. Like war just took off out of nowhere. The bombers just dropped the bomb out of nowhere, and you're like a cat landing and going, what the fuck? Okay, now I gotta go. And I'm in now defense mode, and what the fuck, you know? And how did I get out of that? And now scrambling my house and 3 dogs and going into safety mode, but no shelter will take you because you got 3 big dogs. Or like, just 5 years of off and on, of no family, no friends around, no nothing. Like, it wasn't that friends weren't around. It was just that in this industry, the entertainment industry, friends are a very loosely used term.
Yeah.
So as we both know in our careers, how many people have actually been with you for the last 40 years
Yeah.
that are still in your life?
Yeah. Very few.
I mean, I can say foundationally, I know people that are still in my life from the age of 5 years old. So I know I'm loyal and committed, but I also know that I've moved around a lot. So to look at somebody like you, thankfully, even through technology, we can have this yummy, loving conversation, very authentic and real, exactly the kinds of things that why I want to do this platform. Because, yeah, we could have thought we were walking in to talk about the business, but I did, what I love about conversing is you never know what peels back and
Uh-huh.
gets revealed. And this to me is the core of how and who we became, who we become, and where we're going forward. And what's so important for people to hear that we're two very real, authentic women who have lived a lot of life, and we've just like skimmed the surface of the life we've lived to get to where we are and what we've seen and why I love you so much
Hmm.
and why I think anybody who has you in their life, however they have you in their life, is so very fortunate to have you in their life,
Thank you.
because you are somebody who does care,
Mhm.
does see, does hear, is present, even maybe in times that you didn't want to be any of those things. Maybe at a time when things got really dark and you said, you know what, the basement floor has been hit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have nothing to give you. Have you ever had that moment?
Oh yeah. I was 16 and attempting suicide. I mean, who the hell knows in 1975 in Cocoa Beach, Florida, anything about suicide? Like, that it's not like people were talking about it or even kids in school fantasize. You know what I mean? It was like, for me, how did I even come up with that? I don't know. But the point is that I, I had no hope. I saw no future. And I was tired of being beaten by my mother. I was tired of being beaten by my husband. I was tired of being told I was stupid. In school, I was tested as a lower learner. I did not feel like I was of value to anybody, and that terminating my life would be the easiest thing for all involved. And I love sharing this story because this goes back to being nice or whatever. I am definitely a caretaker. And if you can appreciate this twisted humor, so the backstory. So I knew what I was going to do. I had this massive vial of pills, and I went to a bar, which we did. I was 16 then. Yes. So back then in Florida, they didn't check your IDs, and we looked older. And so my best friend Janet, who's still my best friend, Janet, her boyfriend at the time, Paul, my husband, and we go to the bar, and I waited for them to get just drunk enough that I thought that they were so engrossed in their conversation they wouldn't pay attention to my spending some time away. So I just said, you guys, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. And so I went to the bar and I got this huge pitcher of beer, and then I got into my husband's Buick Skylark.
My face for first car. I love a Buick Skylark. You're talking my game, girl.
And it was like this really pretty blue, this kind of a light sky blue kind of thing. But anyway, I sit in the car and I've got the windows up and the locks down, and I'm just sitting in the front of the car, assuming that I'm going to fulfill my objective. And I sat there gobbling up the pills and drinking the beer to wash them down. And probably about 8 to 9 minutes into that plan, Janet comes out and sees what I'm doing in the car, and she starts screaming at me to stop. And I'm like, no, let me go. And she starts slamming her hands on the window. Now I'm starting to get worried about my girlfriend cutting her hand. But I wasn't quite ready to let go. And so I just kept, and then she got my husband, and now he's banging his hands on the windows. And now I'm like, oh my God, the people I love the most in my life are going to hurt themselves. I better stop my suicide because I don't want them to hurt their hands.
Oh my God, it's so good. It's so good.
So yes, that's what happened when I was 16. I had hit the basement. That was the wall, whatever proverbial expression. I was done and I didn't want to live anymore. And I didn't think that anybody would care.
Well, I think that obviously, well, thank God people cared, and people, good, bad, or otherwise, like you had your good friend and then your, not good influence, ironically showing up all the same time, which is kind of an interesting theory in and of itself. Like you no, stay so I can hurt you. No, stay because I love you.
Right. Now get your ass out of the car so I can smack you around a little bit. You're a lot handier than the dog.
Exactly. So after that situation, how soon after did you get out of your marriage?
So let me see. That was around November of 1975. And then January of 1976, I would leave him and be homeless from January of 1976 till June of 1976. And then I would graduate, just barely, but I would graduate from high school and then move to Chicago.
At 16 or 17?
17.
And why Chicago?
Well, the short version is I had two older brothers that were in Chicago, and they were very successful hairdressers in Lincoln Park. They had a salon called Brothers. Imagine two Warren Beatty's, from Shampoo.
Oh my God.
Very tall, very handsome, very charming, very talented hairdressers. But the one of them, I'll keep his name out of it. One of them had come to my high school graduation and saw the deplorable situation I was living in. And he said, you can't live like this. Come to Chicago. I'll take care of you. You can move into my apartment. I live in this great area called Lincoln Park. And I'll take care of you. And so I was like, and I barely really knew him because he was 8 years older than me. Mm-hmm. But I was ready to take any opportunity, talking about desperate. And so he picks me up at the airport, and he said at the airport, you know how I told you I was going to take care of you? And I said, yeah. He goes, well, I have a new girlfriend and she doesn't want you around. So I've left you my studio apartment. You've got the month where you can get yourself a job and get yourself financially independent, but you can't move into me. And if you remember 2020 Lincoln Park West.
Of course.
Yeah. So he had this beautiful like skyrise apartment overlooking the city. And no, you can't come here. You're going to live in the studio behind the Park West. Where you open up the door and you open up the door and the bed, the door hits the bed. It's so small. So anyway, that was my introduction to Chicago. But that's why I came. It's really strange. God has a very interesting sense of humor. I learned in the world of recovery, if you ever want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And again, like, many people in a moment like that, Marie, would be like, okay, I'm out. Like, clearly I'm not supposed to be doing this, but this is just, I think, another way of showing people that wasn't again, a close the door situation. So how did you take your inspiration from there, and what was your next move?
Well, in the next 24 hours, there was a knock at my apartment door, and I looked through the peephole, and there was my Vietnam veteran Shampoo looking brother. And I was like all excited. Oh my God, I hadn't seen him in like years and years and years.
This being the other brother.
The oldest one. Yeah. And I opened up the door all excited to see him. And he stood there and he said, I don't know what the fuck you're doing here. I took care of your sister, who is the sister between us. He said, I took care of your sister. Get the fuck out of Chicago. I want nothing to do with you. Okay.
And both of these brothers were products of your parents?
Yes.
The same parents,
Yes,
right?
biological. Mhm.
Okay, so this made sense.
Okay. Yes. Okay. And then, and there, herein lies the irony. So I had started drinking when I was 10, and let me see, drugs, pot was at 13. And so when I got to Chicago, I learned about this stuff called speed.
Yeah.
And so I got addicted to speed, and I had passed out in my apartment. And that's when my older brother thought, maybe she needs a little intervention in her life to maybe guide her. So
This was in the first month.
yeah. And so he referred me to this employment agency called called People Incorporated on the corner of Division and State. And then the owner, Perry Orr, right?
Literally my personal division. You crack me up, girl. I can't even take it. I can't take it.
So it'll get better though. Hold on, because it's going to really strike home. So so my oldest brother referred me to the owner, Perry Orr, at People Incorporated on the 3rd floor of 8 West Division. And I interviewed with Perry at his employment agency. And now this was a kid just graduated from high school, and the only skills I had was my junior high typing and the job program that I had had through my senior year of high school, where I was administrative assistant at City Hall, taking mail to the firemen, or, I mean, like, it was just random shit I think they made up. But anyway, the point is that, I took those little bit of skills that I had and the only nice outfit that I had to interview in. And Perry said, all right, kid, call me tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. and I'll let you know if I've got any job openings to send you out on. So I sat there with the phone. If you remember the telephones, the big black ones with the rotary dial. And so I had that on the bed, and I was sitting there waiting for 10 o'clock to happen. And at 10 o'clock, I immediately picked up the phone and I called Perry and I said, hi, Mr. Orr, this is Marie Anderson, following up from my interview yesterday, because we were taught in our job program how to use the telephone. And
that
so,
was an excellent follow-up, by the way.
thank you. And so Perry said, you're hired. I said, what? He goes, you're hired. He said, all I wanted to know, were you capable of following direction?
Mm-hmm.
And I asked you to call me at 10 o'clock. You called me at 10 o'clock, and that's the kind of employee that I want.
Mm-hmm.
So I would eventually become his assistant receptionist. And again, I think it was something that was made up, because his receptionist was like, there were 13 people that were employment counselors, but it wasn't really, it was busy, but it didn't really need 2 receptionists. But soon after that, he would fire the receptionist, and then I would become the formal receptionist. And very soon after that, he would open up PS Chicago.
Oh my God.
So I would be working for Perry during the day at People Incorporated. And then at night, I'd go down to PS Chicago and be the worst waitress that any bar had ever seen, because I'm dyslexic and I couldn't count, $1.25 for this drink, $1.50 for that drink, kind of thing. But after 3 years of working for Perry, he came to me one day and he said, Marie, I've got a job opening for you, and I really want you to go interview with this fashion photographer. His name is Stan Malinowski. I'm like, fashion photographer? No way. I don't want to go work for a fashion photographer. He's going to rape me when I walk in the door. And Perry said, shut up, kid. You're going to do what I tell you to do. I know what's best for you. Just put on a nice outfit. And you learn from being in the employment agency, you always want the offer. Whether you want the job, at least you want the offer. So you get in there and you get the offer and make me proud. So within a few minutes of walking into Stan's studio, which was his apartment on Astor Street,
Oh my God.
I was like, this is where I belong, God. Okay, thank you. I'm ready to start my new life.
Unreal.
So if Perry had not directed me to Stan Malinowski, oh, wait, let me tell you this quick story.
Yeah.
So it's super relevant. So after working for Perry, like being an administrative assistant was not very stimulating for me, and Perry knew that. But you know, he had taken me from receptionist to office manager. Then I became his personal assistant in that 3-year time. But I was still feeling lost in life. I tried joining the Army.
Of course you did.
True story.
You like structure.
That sounds like a
purpose.
That sounds like a promising opportunity. So
Right.
anyway, so I interview with the recruiter, and everything's good. He takes me out to lunch across the street. Can't remember the name of the restaurant that went out of business, but anyway, we're sitting at the lunch table. He takes out his briefcase, hands me the contract, hands me the pen. And he said, all right, Miss Anderson, all I need is that signature and you're going to be in the Army. I said, okay. And I'm putting pen to paper. And he said, but wait, I do have one question before you sign that. I'm like, yes, sir. He goes, have you ever experimented with drugs? And I said, oh, hell yeah. I was drinking as a 10-year-old. I was smoking pot as a 13-year-old. Since I've been to Chicago, I've been heavily involved in speed and cocaine. I've been taking some hallucinogenics that I really like. And he takes the pen out of my hand, puts it into his briefcase, takes the contract off the table, puts it in his briefcase. He's closing the briefcase. I said, what? What's the problem? He goes, we don't take drug addicts into the Army. I suggest you try joining the Navy.
Oh, snap. Oh, wow. That's hysterical that you say that. I wanted to become a naval officer. Little did I know they took drug addicts versus the Army. That's classic.
So talking about a God strike, you know, God was clearly working there. He had other plans for me.
Yeah, clearly. And I mean, when we use the word God, I mean, God for you might mean God, like figuratively. And for me, God is like, I definitely think it's the universe working for sure. And I remember as a kid always being like, you know, being raised Jewish, it was like, I love the religion. I love in the sense that when I say I love the religion, let me be very clear. I don't feel like it, and I could be really talking out my ass right now. It just feels like for me, a beautiful way to practice. But I never could conceptually go, well, what is God? Like, how do you wrap your brain around that? But I definitely do believe that there are these moments in time, all of which you've just before mentioned, that are these moments where, whether it's angels, moments, universe, energy, stars align, whatever you want to call it, that's meant for you to come to that point in the road, be like, I'm going to either go this way or I'm going to go this way. And now I'm going to be driven that way because of X, Y, and Z. And there's definitely been that for you. And I'm curious because, you know, again, it all goes back to, you know, this philosophy and foundation of, Is it timing? Is it meant to be? Is it philosophical? Is it who you're aligned with? Is it a combination of producing all that to become the baby that you become? Like, it all goes back to that. And I think it's interesting because you and I have both seen ourselves flower. I don't know, to the point where we're, have we finished? No. Ironically, speaking of Stan Malinowski, which is a perfect segue, having met him at 18, then having re-met him when you sent me there 6 years later, crazy enough. And Stan and I never working together. And he was like, it's not that I don't want to work with you, but I think that there's something else I'm supposed to be doing. And speaking of a moment in time, and I think I share this with you, but it's perfect for this conversation. So at the time, Stan, in this, I don't know if it was the Astor place or somewhere else, I felt very small, but he had this big ass Xerox machine. And I felt big, but that's just my own, mindset. And he's like, I feel like there's something I should be sharing with you. And he proceeds to take this image in a frame off the wall and take it out, put it in the Xerox machine, print it up, give me a copy, puts it back in the frame, hangs up and says, so what do you see? And I said, well, there's a bunch of numbers, names, and it looks like things people are aligned with. He said, yeah. So what's the youngest age? I said 9. He said, what's the oldest age? I said 101. And he says, and what is the average age on this piece of paper? And I looked at the paper and I said 57. He said, right. And who is the person who's got 57 in front of their name? I said, Ray Kroc. He says, right. And what did Ray Kroc do? And I said, he started McDonald's. and he said, right. So Felicia, I know here you are at 24. I met you at 18. Wow. You think you're already supposed to be where you're supposed to be. I'm here to tell you that you're going to have to get to that age or more to come into who you're here to be.
Whoa.
And I was like, really? Because I've lived a lot of life already.
Are you sure?
Are you sure, Mr. Malinowski? Come on, Stan. This is my second meeting with you. Really? I waited 6 years and I didn't even know I was supposed to have this meeting. And now you're going to philosophize on me, philosophize, whatever you're doing, however you make up that word. And so cut to, I carried that piece of paper with me for a very, very long time, to the point where now I speak on it.
Yeah.
And now I've gotten to this age. And I'm like, I really do feel like he was completely intuitively correct.
I don't remember. I mean, I'm about to talk like he's not alive. He's very much alive and we keep in touch all the time.
I wish he was here.
I do what?
I wish he was on this call.
Right? He's such a hoot. But what I was going to say is, I don't remember Stan being that deep or that philosophical. But maybe being an employee obviously was a different situation. But what I would like to bring up before we close, you button up your podcast here, what for me, and we haven't even gotten into this component, but I am a sexual assault survivor. And speaking of Stan, when I started working for Stan, I think one of the first projects that we worked on before I got really involved in the fashion aspect of his was he was shooting for Playboy and Penthouse. I think he was finishing up his Penthouse and transitioning to Playboy, something like that. I have a vague memory, but the point is that he was also involved with, it was either Louis or Oui magazine. It was a French gentleman's magazine. Mm-hmm. But what I find fascinating is, having been a sexual assault survivor before working for Stan, I really didn't understand what had happened to me and the whole idea of survivor consequences and that kind of stuff. But I do remember being on set with Stan and telling myself, yes, we're here. This woman is nude. Her legs are open. She's not wearing any panties. And my job is to make sure that her face doesn't shine.
Right.
It was incredibly awkward to me, but I didn't know why.
Right.
I did not have enough awareness, but like my soul just felt very uncomfortable. But at the same time, I was trying to appreciate her beautiful body. I was trying to appreciate her beauty, the lighting, the beautiful luxe garments that Stan had as accoutrement, because they really weren't like covering her body much.
Right.
There were multiple girls. And then flash forward, I would become, involved in the Elite Network. And then I would overhear a conversation, which this year I've been on 60 Minutes Australia and Vice TV and 66 Minutes France. And I've been very vocal about this since I overheard this conversation, but it was about late 1989 that I overheard a conversation between John Casablancas and Gerald Marie from Paris Elite, defending themselves for sleeping with 13 and 14-year-old girls. Then I knew that was a problem that I could not be a part of. And slowly things started coming together for me to start understanding about inappropriate activity, and I don't have to accept the fashion business and the sexual impropriety that happens, or the hostile work environments that happen, and not just in fashion, it happens anywhere. Look at the gymnasts that have been in the news for years, and the Sandusky and the football, it just goes on and on. But I was involved in the fashion business, and as a result of hearing that conversation, I think I was 28, 29, somewhere around there. And no, I was 30. And after I heard that conversation, I quit my job at Elite because—
And that was 1989?
Yeah.
See, I left in 92, and that was the things that I was trying to remember, because I didn't realize that you had already quit.
Yeah, I left in 1990, and then I just quit the modeling business. I'm like, this is so gross. If this is what the modeling business is all about, I don't want any part of it. And so for 2 years, the agency business. So for 2 years, I had a little company called Model Futures, and it was right below People Incorporated on the second floor. I went right back to where I was comfortable at 8 West Division. But that little company, Model Futures, would become ARIA, Model and Talent Management. I opened up that in 1992 with Mary Boncher. But the conversation that I overheard with John and Gerald was, I know this is wrong. I don't know what to do about it. I was trying to talk to media at the time about the sexual impropriety in the fashion business, and nobody would listen. And, all these years have passed, decades have passed. There was only one person that was my advocate, and it was, or is, his name is Michael Gross. He's a journalist out of New York. He had written the book Model: The Ugly Business of Beautiful Women, where he was talking about how I had discovered Cindy Crawford and how I had overheard that conversation between John and Gerald. And he was the only person that would acknowledge that this is happening, this is wrong, it needs to change. Nobody would do anything, even with a journalist of his significance. I would find out later that his life was being threatened as a result of talking about these things. That fortunately never happened to me. But as these decades have passed, and I got clean and sober in 2004, and then I started to learn so much more with that, taking away the drugs, taking away the alcohol. I learned so much more about oppression and abuse and power and sexual exploitation.
Mhm.
So it helped me better understand why I wasn't comfortable working in Stan's studio with Playboy, centerfold girls or
Mhm.
the centerfold tests,
Mhm.
because that was very what is called triggering. That
Correct.
that did not feel right with my soul. And
Right.
so that has been, over the decades, that has been my objective, is to bring awareness and to be an agent of change, to try to create safe work environments for my models, for all creatives, not just models, in general. But since the Me Too, Harvey Weinstein,
Jeffrey
Crosby,
Epstein,
Jeffrey
all of it.
Epstein, yeah, now finally we have Me Too fashion.
Yeah.
And so, back to, when you think about it, kind of like as a martial artist or as a samurai, walking many miles, as me being a warrior, walking all these miles, only to be now finally, as I said, with the TV shows, global television shows, now listening to my voice, sharing my story. Now it's like, oh, I kind of understand what my life has been about.
Right. Your purpose.
I've just been kind of like collecting
Planting
tiny,
seeds.
excuse me?
Planting seeds.
Yeah, but it's kind of like I've been collecting these little life experiences, magical or not magical. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, so my life does have a purpose, and it's a good thing that I did not die as a 16-year-old and I did not execute that suicide. Like, when I think about the books that I've written that have been published worldwide, and the first one was Cindy Crawford on the cover, right? Like, I've done some serious shit.
Yeah.
And so now it's like, okay, what's my last act?
And that
What
was
is
what
my,
I was. And what do you think your last act is?
I don't know.
Well, that's good. You don't need to know, because obviously, but this is the beautiful thing about this conversation. Unlike a conversation where you'd be just in a documentary talking about the abuse and all the unfortunate the darkness of the fashion model business, right? You get to see in this conversation, hopefully different than maybe other conversations, because of our connection and our journeys, how all of these things have led you to this place, how all of these things have been a purpose, how all of these things have made you the empathetic, intuitive healer who has been the teacher, who has been the warrior, who has been the journeyman, who has been the woman, who has been the inspiration, who has been the voice, who did set those precedences. And I relate to this because as you and I have had these kind of parallel lives, why I didn't know you at Quiddly was because my film career was taking off in 1990. And by 1992 was moving to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And while I was rising up, and this isn't about me, this is to show you your parallel and what your purpose is. While I was rising up, I came to LA and went, what is in this water? What's with these people? Because I started coming up against some seriously famous, abusive people that I was aligned with as their personal hair and makeup artists. And no matter how many times I rose up, people would try to pull you back down. Yeah. And then, of course, then I got involved with leaving my marriage and getting involved with, domestic violence and all those things, and then winning awards and blah, 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 and continuing. And here I am now, over 35 years in my industry, something like that crazy. And my point to it is when you ask yourself, what is my purpose? What is my passion? What am I here to do? What am I here to accomplish? Am I doing it? Am I on the right path? A year ago, and I've been speaking on this abuse, and I've been speaking on these things, especially since I survived abuse back in the 90s, right, in the early 90s, mid 90s. I feel like, people think I'm like 20 years younger than what I am. And I really believe, Marie, and I would feel this of you as well. I feel that it's like, and this is what I say, come, sit around the campfire, Camp Fifi Uncensored, where the soul is young, where the spirit is young, the soul is wise, and the life stories are, ever flowing. And my point to that is that here's a perfect example of us sitting down. We've never had this kind of actual trajectory and in-depth kind of reveal and pull back the curtain. And I know we could do like 10 more of these 2-hour segments and barely, scrape the surface. But I think it's so interesting to have two women like ourselves who have had this connection for all these years, didn't even realize all of the stuff that even made us more connected, and yet again paralleling out into the universe what we're doing. I've spoken on the abuse, I've spoken on the unfortunate circumstances of the entertainment industry, that I wanted to come in as a director and a DP, not as a hair and makeup artist. But I knew that I was going to be the only woman when I was at Columbia, the only woman in film school in my class. I knew that that was not going to be easy. I knew when I got into fashion photography, I was already a trained photographer. I could have been doing what those men were doing, all those men I was working with. How many goddamn women photographers were in the industry? One, fucking one. I would do everything but point and shoot the goddamn camera.
Yeah.
And I was the one of 3 females on a film set at 28 years old, heading a department.
Wow.
And looking around going, why is this like an NFL locker room? And I was saying that back then in 1990. And thank God I got on with men well, but not to be sexualized. And trust me, people were trying to sexualize me. And you and I both know I wasn't the thinnest girl on the block. It didn't matter. I mean, ironically, you guys, I don't know if you even remember this, the very same day that you sent me to meet Dan, my ex-husband, we won't say any more names, you guys were asking me to come into your agency and talk about becoming a full-figure model.
Yes. Yes, I remember that.
I'm like, you women are crazy. You know how to, like, what are you talking about? Like, these women tower over me. I fucking should have just gone for it. But I still think it was crazy. But again, those moments were like, okay, well, why does one take another? Why did one? Yeah. Listen, I was 24 and I was submitted for a Michael Mann movie. I don't know if you know this.
No.
And I got the part. This is before you met me. I'd gotten the part. And I was a lead in everything I went out for.
Wow.
And when I got on set in full hair, makeup, wardrobe, everything, the man, the myth, the whatever, comes onto the set when all cast and crew are in place, walks on set in front of everybody and says, get the fat girl off the set.
Holy shit.
So what you don't know about me is that as much talent as I have in this little sliver, and I mean that with great humility, and all the people I made laugh and cry and entertain through my dancing, my singing, and my performing, all coming up, shut me right out and down right then and there. And I made a decision I was never going to put myself in that position again, which is why I went behind the scenes. And then I've dealt with years and years and years of putting Humpty Dumptys up on the wall. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying people aren't talented and gifted, but a lot of putting people up on the wall and supporting. And look, I love what you said about doing things selfishly because you get things out of it and the whole thing. Well, of course, so do I. But I'm also done with being told, dimming my light, which is why I wanted to do this platform so I could bring other people into this world as well, because of what I've always been good at doing, not because I need to be heard, but because I have been told so many times how many books I need to write, how much speaking engagement, all the things that I've done throughout my life, just people aren't aware of it. why I've also invited people like yourself, women into my life, into this podcast, because of what you know about me, but what you don't know about me, and what I know about you and what I don't know about you, and what more people need to hear about people like us, so they know that they can too get up and fucking go out into the world and do something masterful and powerful and affect and inspire and change people's lives. And know that if this door closes, go fucking kick open the next door, because it's right there. Yeah. Get the fuck up, because you've got the power within you, and fucking snap out of it. And fucking know that you're here for masterful reasons, to make people laugh and to make people cry. And just because you come across one sick fuck, it's just one sick fuck.
Yeah.
To not give your power away, but to put your power forth in the most God-given way and spread it loud and proud.
Damn it.
Because, yeah, you know, like you, just this last year, I was writing this story about this industry that we're now on the precipice of, do we, or are we, or will we strike? Yeah. And all these people are now coming out with their stories anonymously about the abuses that people were not prepared for and that people couldn't talk about. So I think the beautiful thing is, and I know we're going to have to wrap this up, but we're going to have to do this again. So know that we have a date going forward. We just have to figure this out.
Okay.
But know that I think the purpose of this conversation for you and me is to not only be able to be in our own safe zone that authentically allows us to just be us, but allows us to be able to share us so other people can hear themselves in our stories. And then in turn, be able to look themselves in the mirror and go, if they could do it, so can I.
Awesome. Hear, hear.
So much. You are just such my heart. It makes me smile. My cheeks are vibrating. I love you so much. I know we're on a time thing, so we're going to let you go. I just want to thank you so much for being here. I know we've just barely scraped the surface, so please be my guest again for another 2-hour session, because I want to talk more with you.
Anything for you, Felicia.
Mwah, Marie. Love you so much. Mwah, 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 mwah.
Be safe.
Talk soon. Have a great day. Love you. Okay.
Love you. Love you. Love your show.
Love you. Love you. Oh my God, that was just the most amazing thing. Having this conversation with Marie, holy smokes, I can't even. That is just, to me, the beginning of what I feel like. I've got mascara running down my face, and whoever cares. But I just think that that was such an incredible reflection, and hopefully an inspiration to people out there, men and women, that no matter what comes in your way, no matter what feels like is a hurdle, that there is another side to that coin, and that it's just a willingness to make a decision to get out of your own way and to get up and be of purpose in your life. Love you so much. Thank you.